We ready? All right, thank you all for coming today. I'm gonna introduce the speaker. I think we're good on that. All right, thank you.
All right, hello everyone. Thanks for coming to Mr. Nathan Hayes' presentation today. He is visiting us from the island of Jersey, where he works at the Government of Jersey Environmental Department on the biosecurity team as a senior scientific officer. He attended Liverpool John Moores University for his bachelor's of science in geography, and then Utrecht University in the Netherlands for his MS. In sustainable development and environmental and ecosystem change. All right, join me in welcoming Mr. Nathan Hayes.
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the introduction, Crystal. So I come from this small little island. I'm here today to talk about invasive species in the context of that small island. So since I've been here, I've been astonished by the scale of America. I mean, I knew it was very big, but to me, coming from an island that is this small, having to go for a drive to go for a walk is quite boring for me. But hopefully I can express to you guys, some of the management strategies and some of the techniques we use to manage invasive species, and you can take it into your own work. So very quickly, my first question is, does anyone actually know where Jersey is? Right. So we are here. So small that when I zoom out that far, we don't even show up on the map. That is Normandy here. So we are a Channel Island in between England and France. We are British. I'll come on to that in a little bit. But we're very close to France. So I'm going to talk about why that's important in a moment. But before I get onto that, a few slides on what we're famous for. So Jersey cows, world famous, so famous in fact that when I was finding these photos of Jersey cows to include in my presentation, and a little bit of a pit stop for some breakfast, and I noticed that the milk was from Jersey cows. And I bought that at Target, I think. So I was going to try and explain how famous they are, but I don't think I need to. I bought this was random. I didn't realize it was Jersey cows. So that just shows the importance of the Jersey cow worldwide. We're also famous, apparently, for our Jersey Royal potatoes. So we have these like really steep slopes that get the sun earliest on the east of the island. They're really good for growing potatoes. It's kind of a niche market that we have. We've got like nice sea views, and we can show potatoes being grown in coastal areas, and it's a good marketing strategy, and it's done very well over the years. And we're also famous for beautiful beaches and beautiful scenery. So how did Jersey come to be? We were shaped by the Ice Age, essentially. So we used to be attached to what is mainland Europe, to mainland France. And then around 6,000 to 8,000 years ago, following the last Ice Age, as sea levels rose, Jersey then became detached from that continent. So how big are we? I mentioned that we're an island roughly 9 by 5 miles. So 46 square miles. A bit bigger when the tide goes out. And as I mentioned earlier, we are only 14 miles from coastline France, and that's very important. So I've managed to get the history of Jersey in 5 bullet points here, which is quite impressive, but I think historians would be upset with me. So we've got a rich history of influenced by both British and French cultures. We even have our own language called Gerrier. Don't ask me to speak any of it because I can't. In 1066, following William the Conqueror's victory at the Battle of Hastings, we became part of the English crown, and it wasn't until 1204 that became sort of official. There was lots of back and forth between France and England at this time. So 1204, Jersey pledges its allegiance to the British crown, essentially, hence why I'm now speaking to you all in English today and not in French. So another important part of history is that during World War II, we were actually occupied by German forces, and you can see in this photo here, this tower was built by Germans during that occupation in World War II, and Jersey's landscape shows bunkers and towers like this all over. So I mentioned the Ice Age and the rising sea levels. So the east coast towards France there, you can see that that channel is actually quite shallow in depth. So you can see here where depth profile extends from France all the way out west. So Guernsey, one of the other Channel Islands, their depth profile goes from 50 to 100 meters in the south of their island. So ours is a lot more shallow. And that affects the sort of fisheries industry we have and the relationship that we have in France. And get quite heated in competing for those fishery resources. So you might not be aware of some of the other Channel Islands. Jersey is by far the best. Guernsey is second largest, and Guernsey is responsible for Sark, and we have Alderney up to the north there. Home is only a mile long. So who am I? What do I do? I work in the biosecurity team in Jersey. So biosecurity, we use as a term to describe plant health, invasive species, and what we term human vector monitoring. Ticks and mosquitoes. I'll talk a little bit more about mosquitoes during this presentation. So I'll just explain a little bit about what we do. So I think you guys use invasive species in a more broader term than we do. So we split it, invasive species, plant health. So plant health is pests and diseases that impact plants. Usually, or historically in Jersey, that was focused on the agricultural environment. Now it's shifted a little bit, still focused on the agricultural environment, but also in the wider environment. What pests and diseases are coming in that can have impacts on Jersey's natural agricultural environment. So in the plant health side of the team, we monitor for more than 400 organisms that can affect agricultural plants and trees in the wider environment. And how we do that is a multitude of ways, using pheromone traps, visual surveys, taking diagnostic samples for analysis, drones, etc., etc. Why do we do it? Well, we have to. Fundamentally, we have to for trade implications. So when you move plants and plant products around the world, you have to have things in place that say that they're free from certain pests and diseases, or they've been treated, etc., plant passporting systems. So we do all this to secure to ensure that we don't have any pests and diseases that might impact on other areas by moving goods around. We also do it to check that our environment is in good health and that agricultural crops are in good health. And we report on our findings to the UK and the EU. I talked about the implications for trading plants. So this just kind of shows how we group our surveys. It's not that important, but we can't survey for 400 organisms individually. Some of them are very important, so we do. But what we tend to do is group our surveys. So glasshouse surveys usually involves tomatoes and peppers and stuff like that. So pests and diseases of glasshouses get grouped into that survey, and we go out and we look for them in a whole. And that's an important strategy when you have a small team and lots of things to look for. So human vector monitoring, I will talk a little bit about this guy here, Aedes albopictus, which is the Asian tiger mosquito. But in a nutshell, we monitor mosquitoes, ticks, sandflies, amongst other things, that have human health consequences and sometimes animal health consequences. We engage the public on this. We identify hotspots, and we do all we can really to make people aware of the threats that some of these species can bring. So I talked about the plant health side, which is my side. Now I'm actually going to talk to you more about this side, which is the invasive species side. This is headed up by Alistair Christie, who's my equivalent in that team, who is known as the Asian hornet man in Jersey. You guys call it the yellow-legged hornet. That's Vespa velutina. So what they do is they monitor invasive species in Jersey. They do horizon scanning, they assess the feasibility of managing some of these species, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about these in more detail as we go on. So here we have yellow-legged hornet, koipu, Japanese knotweed. You guys call koipu nutria, I believe. So, what are invasive species? I don't think I need to tell you guys what invasive species are. But very quickly, there are lots of definitions, but essentially they are species that have not evolved. They're not native to an area. Now, Jersey being an island, it's important that we get that right. So we split from mainland Europe 6,000 to 8,000 years ago. So what was native to Jersey then and what was native to Jersey now? Those questions need answering, and one of the methods you can use to determine that is using the pollen record. So what species have been present in Jersey throughout history using a pollen record. Using history, we've got a good range of historical people who collected a lot of plants and a lot of animals and know what were native in Jersey or not. But there's still areas that are very much up for debate. Sorry, I'm using the laptop and this, so I'm just catching up where I am. There is debate sometimes over whether something is native or not to Jersey, but it's very important we use that scientific evidence to back up what we're saying. So invasive species are non-native species that cause harm to the environment. Not all non-native species act invasively. Not all non-native species cause harm to the environment. So really what we try to do is determine first and foremost whether or not they're non-native, then whether they're acting invasively. So are they going to cause harm to the environment? And that harm is usually described by economic, by environmental, or by social. So again, I think this is all quite familiar to you guys. So we know that invasive species worldwide have significant impacts on biodiversity. We know that those impacts can lead to the change in ecosystems and ecosystem services. As a result of that, and in its own right, they then are responsible for economic costs. Pathways for introduction are global trade. We're very much globalized now, things moving across the world. We all go up day line, and then it arrived the next day. In a lot of instances, tourists, again, people are moving around the world. It's not just products. People are going to different places, and something as simple as not changing your shoes. You go for a walk in France, in a forest, and then you come back to Jersey, and you have the seeds or rhizomes of plants on the sole of your shoe, and then you go out and you walk in Jersey. You have the potential then to introduce a non-native species. It can be that simple. Accidental release is referring to usually people who accidentally release it. It's usually pets. So exotic pets sometimes are quite popular. If that pet escapes and gets into the natural environment, then you have a non-native species and potentially an invasive species that has potential to cause harm to the environment. So what does the invasive species team do about this? Well, we coined this term biosecured bailiwick. So we're referring to the bailiwick of Jersey and the bailiwick of Guernsey here, so the Channel Islands. What we want to do is work really closely together to determine how we can best mitigate the impact of invasive species. But for that, we want to do stuff like horizon scanning to work out what's coming to Jersey. For established species, we do risk assessment, we do management feasibility, and we have specific species action plans about how we're going to respond to a given invasive species coming into Jersey or Guernsey. Mentioned horizon scanning. We also have a wildlife law, which was brought in a few years ago, and it's proven an important tool for us to get landowners on side. So it's not just us saying that invasive species are bad. Actually, we have a law that says that you cannot the wording is a bit strange, but recklessly introduce an invasive species. So there's some legal stuff there that's a little bit difficult and a little bit up for debate, but it's really important that you have legislative backing so that you can not just have conversations with people about why invasive species are bad, but you've got that behind you to say, okay, well, we've got something to do, we've got something to back up. Some more invasive species that have been present in Jersey, the koi poo. We did actually get koi poo come to Jersey from France. They wash up on our shores dead quite often, so 14 miles. This one survived. We really don't know how. It actually, in the end, we think it got hit by a car and it had to be euthanized, but this caused quite a furore in Jersey. There was a lot of media attention to this, but nutria, koi poos, as you guys know, are one of the most invasive species in the world. We did not want that coming to Jersey at all. Quite remarkable, actually, that it managed to swim the channel. But if the weather conditions are right and the tide's right, I guess it's possible. Pampas grass, we've got sow fig, and we've got oak session moth, all of which I will come on to. So, case study. Yellow-legged hornet for you guys, Vespa velutina. This is something actually that kind of kickstarted invasive species work in Jersey that really led to an increase in funding for invasive species in Jersey. So 2017, we have first nests recorded. So at that time, not that many. You guys are familiar with invasive species curve, which I'll show after, but you can see that this kind of exponential is happening. There was a dip in 2024. We went from 13 nests in 2017 to 339 in 2023, 262 in 2024. It's worth mentioning at this point that the collaboration, the work that goes on with the Asian hornet is predominantly led by volunteers. So my equivalent in the invasive species team, Alistair, heads up that group of volunteers, but there are 100 and something volunteers that work exclusively on, in their free time, tracking Asian hornets. And it wouldn't be possible to even show these numbers and to be able to have some impact in controlling them if it wasn't for the help of volunteers. It's a really important point to make. So this map shows superficial area ecologies, primary and secondary nests. So often what happens with yellow-legged hornets, they'll make a primary nest, usually lower to the ground early on in the summer, and then later on they'll make a secondary nest, which is predominantly found high up in trees, which makes it more difficult then to treat and manage against that. "14 miles to France." So what can you do to stop a flying insect that is very common in France when you're 14 miles away? The answer is not a lot. to stop it from coming. You can see that our east and northeast coasts here, when we get northeast and easterly prevailing winds from France, this is where we find the spring queens coming up. You can see that they're heavily condensed into the east and northeast of the island. So geography plays a really important role in understanding invasive species and understanding invasions. A recent bit of research that we were involved in looked at the diet of yellow-legged hornet. And quite remarkably, there are 1,500 different taxa found in their diet. The most common Hymenoptera, which are wasps, bees, ants, etc. Diptera, which are flies. We've got butterflies and moths in there, beetles and weevils, spiders. You'll even see primates in there. We don't think they're feeding on humans, by the way, but there'll be contamination with them feeding on species or something like that. So they're opportunistic predators that are causing significant impacts to our local ecosystems. And that's quite pronounced. And I took this directly as a quote from the paper, that out of the top 50 most commonly occurring prey species, 43 were potential pollinators. And this included 3 of the most dominant European crop pollinators, which is the honeybee and 2 species of bumblebee. And all of the top 10 species by prevalence, they were all flower visitors. So here you have an invasive species that came to Jersey in 2017, its numbers are increasing, and we see a hugely varied diet. It's clear then that this species is going to have a negative impact on not just insect species in Jersey, but pollinator species, which we all know are incredibly important and provide, valuable ecosystem services. I've got links to papers in here, so I can share them later. So that was a case study on yellow-legged hornet, which is already here. But what are we doing to prevent invasive species from coming to Jersey in the first place? Well, this is us meeting with colleagues from Guernsey that I mentioned earlier. We know in invasive species terms that prevention is better than cure. The best thing you can do is prevent the species from coming in, because often when they're already there, it's too late. And I mentioned the invasive species curve. Have you guys seen this before? No? Okay. So there's now lots of variations of this curve, but essentially what it's saying is that from the introduction, if the species is absent, from the introduction, you have a really small window here to eradicate that pest or disease before your costs spiral exponentially and your chance of containment and doing something about it become slimmer and slimmer. So prevention is the absolute key. And that's why we have, I mentioned the trade in plants and plant products before, that's why we have around the world regulations that make sure that plants and commodities coming all around the world are safe from these pests and diseases. It doesn't always work, but it's really important that we have prevention. Now, that being said, it doesn't always work. So the other side of it is that we need to be aware of what has the potential to come to Jersey or to anywhere in terms of invasive species. So we do an exercise called horizon scanning. Now, essentially what this does is look at species that have the potential to come to, in this case, Jersey. So it's not that every single non-native species is invasive, as I mentioned before. Some might not be able to live in our climate, might not be suitable for them. So some just might never get here. We're not expecting lions to show up in Jersey. And if they did, I think we'd have a bigger problem than ecosystem impacts. But really what this does is it looks at what has the potential to arrive and you know, what measures can we put in place to prevent that from happening? So Helen Roy is kind of a famous person in the invasive species world. The horizon scanning exercise that we did with Guernsey looked at 118 high-risk species, and it used this paper as its kind of base, as its method. And it gave us a good idea of what we could look out for, right? What species had the potential to come to Jersey and cause harm. So that's great. So we know about some species that have the potential to arrive in Jersey and cause harm to our ecosystem or to our agriculture. But what about the species that are already here? So we do something called threat score analysis, and I'm going to come onto that in a little bit more detail. Essentially, we risk assess the current threats of species. So this is a terrapin, which is a pet escapee, right? So we have terrapins in our reservoirs. So people have terrapins and, I don't know, they don't like them anymore, so they put them in the wild, or it escapes. This is what you end up with. Now, we don't think it's warm enough in Jersey for them to reproduce. We know with climate change that it might not be too far away, right? So, yeah, we risk assess established species so that we can prioritize our effort. We can't control everything. We can't put money and time and resources into all the invasive species that we have. So we need to do some prioritization. That's where this comes into play. So again, part of this is based from Helen Roy's Horizon Scan papers, and a scoring criteria, which I'm going to introduce to you in a second, that was proposed by Molnar 2008. I'll show you the papers. The way that this worked were 3 expert groups that were formed, and they were divided by taxons, so vertebrates, and plants. Really simple, right? Dave Coyle was an expert in the vertebrates group, so shout out to Dave. I think he very much enjoyed his trip to Jersey. So we had our groups, and essentially we had 2 phases. One of it was scoring these established invasive species, so invasive species that we already have in Jersey, scoring them, and then getting together to find some consensus for those scores. Now, scoring was done based on ecological impacts, geographic spread across Jersey, and invasive potential. So ecological impact measures the severity of the impact of the species, natural biodiversity. So you can see that the scores go from 1 being not much disruption to 4 being disrupts entire ecosystems. Now, what's interesting is that Jersey is a small island. There was questions about whether certain species should always be a 4 because you're on an island 9 by 5 miles. So what species, so for example, a species present in water might not have an impact across an entire ecosystem in Jersey. But if we're looking at an animal, a vertebrate that can move and that feeds on native plants, for example, does that interrupt an entire ecosystem in Jersey? You could argue quite strongly that it does, because we're so small. And that's not common. It's not common if you guys have a pest or disease that's introduced into forests. It's a forestry ecosystem that's being impacted. In an island that's so small, there are opportunities for invasive species to have an impact across the whole ecosystem. So it's an important point to make. Geographic extent, again, this was a really interesting, a lot of interesting debate occurred around these scores because of the island context. So in the paper that describes this, they use single habitat, local ecosystem, sub-ecoregion, and ecoregion. It's very hard to quantify what that means in Jersey. And invasive potential is to do with their spread. It's not just their spread in terms of movement, but their spread in terms of how quickly they can reproduce. So this is top 20 threat scored species, right, from that exercise. So these species scored the highest on these criteria. So at the top there, we have three-cornered leek. You might be surprised at that. It's not exactly an exciting species, but it's incredibly invasive and it's everywhere in Jersey. New Zealand pygmyweed, crassula, helmside. We've got the grey-lag goose in there. So this is a very topical in Jersey at the moment. I won't go into that. So lots of these are plants. Interestingly, you have feral cats there. I think a lot of you will know that cats have a very significant impact on biodiversity, pretty much wherever they're found. They're apex predators. Fortunately, whether you like it or not, they will be going out at night and hunting things. It's what they do. It's in their biology. Brown rat, they're opportunists. They will eat pretty much anything, and that includes the eggs of nesting birds. In Jersey, we have close to saying had puffins because we've only got about 3 breeding pairs left. And that is a consequence of things such as the brown rat and feral ferrets. So ground nesting birds, those birds that live in cliff faces, they do not do well when non-native predators are introduced, opportunists are introduced that can eat their eggs. So that's a little look at the top 20 threat scored species. So that gives us a good idea of what established species we have and which are going to cause or are causing the most impact, right? Then what do you do? Well, it's all very well and good saying, okay, we have these top 20 invasives, right? Like an FBI hit list of things that we're looking for. But what are you going to do about it when you have limited resources, limited time, limited funding? I think we're all in that boat. Doesn't matter where you're from, you can't just expect that you can get rid of all of those 20 species and the job be done. You need then essentially another prioritization exercise. So that prioritize invasive species by their impact. Now we're prioritizing what we can do about that. That's called management feasibility. So you take those 20 species that scored the highest, right? Makes sense to take those 20 that scored the highest. And you look at the feasibility of being able to do something about it in terms of eradication. So here, you have your criteria on the left, and you have your response score on the right. And basically, the higher the score, the higher the management feasibility for that species, okay? So it looks at the effectiveness of the eradication strategy. It looks at their likelihood of reinvasion. It looks at negative impacts of that eradication strategy. It looks at cost. It looks at all of these things to determine, okay, so we are going to look at 4 different eradication strategies for Nutria in Jersey. How much are going to cost us? Are they actually going to do anything? You know, if we put this in place for 5 years, what chance have we got of actually eradicating that animal? What's the likelihood of reinvasion? So Asian hornet could score great on all of these, but it's never going to score great on this one, right? Because it's just going to fly over the channel. So we could pump loads of money into trying to eradicate the Asian hornet, could do great in every single metric but one, and that is that it will reinvade because we know it's coming on easterly winds. So there's a nuance to this. Now, this work is ongoing. I wish I could show you all of it, but I can't. These are some of the species that have been or have ongoing management feasibility studies. So based on what I've said, and hopefully not remembering where they were in the list, why do you think some of these have been favorably assessed in a management feasibility study? Anyone got any idea why some of these things, intentionally included this here, why some of these things have scored favorably and we're prioritizing them for eradication?
Since they're plants, you don't have to go catch them. This.
Right. Plant spread is usually slower than that of insects, for example. So that's one thing. Another thing that's not here is that some of these are in isolated pockets on the island. So they're plants, they can't spread very quickly, but actually we know they're confined to isolated pockets. So we're going to go and we're going to go get them, right? So it's important, again, to have that context of where things are. That's where the monitoring comes in, right? You've got to find out what invasive species you have and where are they and, you know, in what abundance, because that then becomes really important. So scoring that I talked about is your window of opportunity, right? You've got a window of opportunity when invasive species are confined to 1 or 2 pockets that needs action quickly. And that means actually, if we're moving Himalayan balsam from Jersey, if you wait 5 years, it could be everywhere. If you know it's in those isolated pockets, you go, you put some herbicide down, it's gone, tick, job done, hopefully. So context is important, right? So recap, and then I'm going to go on to some other case studies. So we talked about kind of invasive species impact on ecosystems. We talked about how the yellow-legged hornet can have a significant impact on insects in Jersey because of its varied diet and specifically on native pollinators. We talked about pathways of introduction. So what else? Not just ecosystems, natural environment that is affected. It's also plant health and agriculture. I mentioned plant health being the more agricultural side of invasive species, right? This guy here, Colorado beetle, is a very important pest to Jersey and actually has been present and eradicated numerous times. It was eradicated in the past where you had access to some pretty nasty chemicals that you wouldn't be allowed to today. So it was like it was an easier time to find solutions. So I think I'm right in saying we're talking about the 50s and 60s. What this does is feed on potatoes. I showed you a slide, Jersey potato, Jersey raw potato, they're important to us. We have a potato industry, it's worth 20-something million pounds a year. That's probably nothing to you guys, but to Jersey, that's quite important, right? And it's a historical thing, it's a cultural thing. So we have actually a special relationship with French officials. We keep mentioning the geography and why that's important. Colorado beetle can fly that distance. We know that they can fly that distance. So what do we do about it? Collaboration is is a really important point of all of this. Invasive species management is how you collaborate with people within your jurisdiction, outside of your jurisdiction. It's really important to get people on board. Since 1975, we've collaborated, that's we being Jersey and Guernsey, with the Plant Protection Service in France to monitor the prevalence of the beetle in the Cotentin Peninsula, which is here. So in that strip of northwest France, every year, twice, in June and July, we go over and we meet with colleagues in France and we count Colorado beetles that we see in fields. That allows us then to provide information to French regulators on whether or not potato field has been infested or not with Colorado beetle. Those results from those surveys lead to compulsory treatment notice for farmers. That leads to angry farmers. Like, there's no doubt about that. They're not happy with the fact, because in other areas of France, they actually don't have to treat for Colorado beetle. But we've got a special relationship with this particular area because we're telling France this is really important to us. So it does lead to angry farmers, not perfect. But what this means is that here you can see 1976, more than 90% of the fields inspected were infested with Colorado beetle. 2020, it's about 20-something%. So it works, right? We've come up with a scheme with France. We say, we'll come over, we'll do some monitoring. You hand out some statutory treatment notices to farmers. They treat the fields with Colorado beetle. We see a 60% drop in the numbers in those surveys. So we haven't found Colorado beetle in Jersey since around 2010, and I think that was a single beetle. We walk along the beaches. It's a really nice survey in the summer. We get to go out and walk along the high tide line. We go, oh, I'm looking for Colorado beetle and I'm getting paid to do it. Great. So one of the better surveys, they're not always like that. Interestingly, they can survive in seawater for hours. They're quite hardy. So yeah, that's just a little case study on how collaboration with colleagues in France has helped us not have Colorado beetle and not have as much of a threat of it coming over, right? So I've talked about ecosystem impacts, I've talked about plant health and agricultural impacts. What else, right? What other impacts could invasive species have? What about just outright disgusting looking? We have here a species called carpet sea squirt, more appropriately, sea vomit. Now this species was found a couple of years ago in our harbour. It's horrible to look at. I know. I'll move on in a minute. But it spreads so quickly, grows so quickly, and it's a marine invasive, right? Which I'm not talking about too much in this presentation, but marine invasives are incredibly difficult. Like, what do you do? There's no borders for marine. They can float in, float out as they wish. What's the problem? Other than the fact that they look disgusting, fisheries and aquaculture could be impacted by this invasive species. Harbour pontoons and boat fouling. So they grow very quickly and they'll grow on pretty much anything. So they can go underneath the hull of a boat or underneath these pontoons. Someone's got to pay to clear that up, right? Slide's broken a little bit there. But so environmental impacts, agricultural impacts, looking disgusting impacts, economic and social implications. I talked about the impact on agriculture. What about the effects of tourism? I can use sea vomit as an example of tourists maybe going, I'm not going to go to that beach anymore because that just doesn't look right. It doesn't look great. So Yeah, we're coming to all the different kind of impacts of invasive species, and I'm going to focus a little bit on public health risks. So some invasive species carry the added problem that they carry diseases, right? So basic mosquitoes. This is Aedes albopictus, the Asian tiger mosquito. So some basic mosquito biology. They can go from egg to adult in about 2 weeks, depends on the species. They can live for 1 to 4 weeks, again, depends on the species and environment. And they vector diseases when they feed on an infected host. So they can affect about 700 million people per year. A lot of that, as you guys will be aware, is malaria in Africa. Thankfully for us, malaria species, Anopheles, are tropical species. We don't think they're going to do very well in Jersey. They're not acting invasively in Europe at the moment. But mosquitoes play a significant role, right, in human disease complex, and they're probably the most studied species in that area. Here are some of the diseases that different species vector. Aedes albopictus, I mentioned the Asian tiger mosquito, that's the one that we're most concerned about. This is what it looks like. Very distinctive, it's an easy one. I'm not an entomologist, I could identify that within 5 minutes, great. This is a native species that you might get confused with. When they're side by side like that, it's like, okay, probably not, right? But actually, they've both got banding on their legs, both got stripes. We've got to be careful with the information that we give out to members of the public when we're asking for public engagement, because sometimes that can backfire when people are calling you every 5 minutes. Like, I found it. No, you didn't. It's this one. Okay. This is why we're concerned. We're here, again, not on the map, too small, but we are there. This is a situation of Aedes albopictus in Europe as of May and July 2024. That looks scary. This is slightly less scary, right? So previously we're looking at the regions that they have been found in. So they're, even if that's, a handful of mosquitoes, it's going to show up as red. And this is applied district data that actually shows where they are. So you can see like little isolated pockets in certain areas. They're in Normandy. That concerns us. This was a live reaction of me and my colleague Tom when we found what we thought were mosquito eggs. So we have these little traps, like a plant pot filled with water and a bit of polystyrene on top, okay? It's very simple, polystyrene floats to the top. This species of mosquito, they lay their eggs above the water line. So what are they going to do when they have a plant pot filled with water and a bit of polystyrene on top? They're going to lay their eggs on the polystyrene. A rainfall event comes and it washes that into the water. In this case, it won't because the polystyrene floats. That's why we use them. This is actually a mosquito egg. These are non-biting midge eggs, so the panic was over. But yeah, so just a whistle-stop tour. I think I'm running low on time, aren't I? So mosquitoes, they vector diseases. We monitor for them at our harbour. That's where they're most likely to come in, from people's cars, from people's cabins, from truck driver cabins. They're attracted to CO2, to human scent. So we have traps up at the harbour to look for them. Another invasive species, two invasive species, in fact, oak and pine processionary moth, human health impacts. They also have ecological impacts. They defoliate oak and pine trees, respectively. They move in nose to tail processions, hence their name. And I'll show you a video of why that can be to our benefit in just a moment. Why are they a public health impact? So they develop these hairs. So this is like a silky nest. They develop these hairs later on, like third and fourth instars. that have an irritating protein called foamopodrin, which is where they get their Latin name from. It's horrible, you don't want it. Here's where they were found. This is like our main outbreak site, right? So we had 4 distinct locations with nests and trees. So what do we do about it? Do we set everything on fire, panic, fell trees, spray insecticides? Not quite. We remove the nests. We have specialist equipment. This is one of our tree climbers. This is the nest. If you can't see it, it's like a little football-sized nest right at the top of a pine tree, very difficult to see. So we remove the nests and we continue monitoring. We put these traps around the trees to catch any processing caterpillars down. We engage with the public on what to look for and to stay away from areas where we know. So parasitoids as well. We've got parasitoids of oak processionary moth, which we found in Jersey. It was a first recording for Jersey. Parasitoids feed on the larvae. They parasitize the larvae, so they're an important control mechanism for these species. And in the native range, they will control them. We don't know how the oak processionary moth got to Jersey. Equally, we don't know how a parasitoid of it got to Jersey. I'd like to tell you this is some great research that we did, and we found this parasitoid and we put it in Jersey and it did some ecological control for us. No, it just already happened to be there. So we have these 4 nest sites. There's been 1 or 2 other locations, and that's really it. And they're not defoliating oak trees very much. So good job, I think. We've done well. Hopefully this video plays. So this is actually pine processionary moth. I mentioned the mouth to nose procession. I've turned off the volume because my colleague is giving some quite interesting commentary, which I won't share with you. But what he says around here is that what they're doing is following the leader all the way down the tree and all the way back up. So the lead moth, the lead caterpillar, has got confused. So they're supposed to process down to the ground to pupate. He's going back up the tree. So basically they're in a circle, which is doing this. So what that meant was we could go with some PPE, some protective equipment, and we could collect them. Very easy. I mentioned public engagement. This is probably the most important part of what we do. I know you guys are very big on public engagement here, and I think it's the right strategy. We need to engage with the public. We need to engage with stakeholders. We need to engage with officials, like I mentioned, the Colorado Beetle campaign in France. Really important that we collaborate. Knowing theory on invasive species and biology and phenology is all very important. But it won't get you anywhere if you can't collaborate with the people around you and you can't get the public on board. This is really important that the public understand what invasive species are and what they can do about it. They want to feel like they can do something, right? This is a poster from last year's Invasive Species Week. We gave public talks. We had stalls in town, in our city, town, where we included some of these invasive species. We had a massive yellow-legged hornet nest. We had terrapins. We had crayfish. We had yellow-legged hornets live in a perspex case. So we were showing all of these things to the public live. They could come, they could ask questions, people bring their children. They're really interested by it, right? This is just some of the messaging that we give to the public. We have a check, clean, dry, and bee plant wise kind of posters. Check, clean, dry, stop the spread, compost with care, know what you grow. All of this imaging is telling the public what invasive species are and what they can do to, plant some native species in your garden rather than invasive ones. Wash your boots when you go for a walk from one place to another, in a different country. Put your boots in the wash because you might introduce plants and plant pathogens. Messaging. Take care of your pets. This is a really important one. People love their pets, but somehow they escape and then they end up in our reservoirs. We want people to respect our countryside. We want people to be responsible for looking after their pets so that we don't have invasive species coming out into the environment. We have campaigns asking people to record sightings of the yellow-legged hornet. We keep the imaging and the messaging really it's common language. We don't want technical language in there. We want people to have a look, see if they can identify it, and they want 1 or 2 places to report it. We do volunteer events. These are a couple of volunteer events from last year, Asian hornet tracking. So the volunteers, they triangulate the hornets, they know how far they fly and in what amount of time, so that they can work out, okay, the nest. So they look, okay, it's flown to the east, and it came back to the bait station within a minute, and they can triangulate and work out how far the nests are, and then you keep zooming in, getting closer until they find the nest. Really cool method. Sour fig removal. We do, this is cliff face in Jersey, so we obviously stayed on the top, but this is what it looked like. This was after a couple of hours when we were done. It's really easy to pull up, like you can just do it by hand. It's like mats and mats of the stuff that you pull up. Sour figs, an invasive plant species from South Africa originally. So we do volunteering, and we want to show people the impact that they're having. So photos like this are good. We want to include measurements saying, okay, you've removed 10, 15 kilos of invasive species. Like we want to have leaderboards of volunteer groups that have done the best. Public engagement is so important. Inclusion, collaboration, to all of this, everything that I've said, the most important thing for me is being able to collaborate. That's why I'm really thankful that I'm here. I'm learning from people in the United States. I'm bringing stuff back ultimately to Jersey that we can use in our fight against invasive species. That is learning specifically about the biology of invasive species, but learning about methods which you guys are using to collaborate with one another, to collaborate with stakeholders, collaborate with the public, to ultimately effectively manage, eradicate, etc. for invasive species. With that, I will take any questions. Thank you very much for your time.
Wondering when you guys are, or when you're making a distinction between a non-native to an invasive species of whether it has big negative impact, is it your team that's actually making that distinction for the island?
So the distinction is made by this group of experts, right? So it's partly our team, it's partly people from, we have what's called the Societe Gerrier, Society of Jersey, basically. And they have experts in entomology, they have experts in botany, etc. So that threat score analysis pulled together these people into those invertebrate plants, vertebrates group, right? So they were made up of partly of our team, partly of the Societe Gerrier team, partly from the National Trust, partly from abroad with people like Dave Coyle, and we have people as far as Hawaii come. So it really is a collaborative effort of experts. Like Jersey's good in the sense that you know where the experts are, because they're on Facebook and they're posting all the time that they found like this #1 new find for Jersey, and it's just like one guy, we know who he is, and we can just call him, so it's easy, right? So yeah, to answer your question, it's partly us, it's partly volunteers, it's partly like amateur experts, because their evidence is also important. It's a combination. Any other questions?
Do you have good collaboration efforts with the other Channel Islands?
Yeah, so I showed an image of us kind of talking with Guernsey, right? And the important thing to come out of that was, I didn't really have time to go into more detail in the presentation, but we did the threat score analysis exercise was kind of set up by a colleague of ours from Jersey. The Horizon scan was set up by Guernsey. So they had a big chunk of work that they were responsible for and they set up, and we had a big chunk of work that we were responsible for and we set up, right? And then we shared and collaborated on that. If we would have done it separately, it just wouldn't have made sense. Yeah. So we got around the table and we did it together and we combined our efforts. So we do work closely with Guernsey. They're a little bit further to the west of us, so, but they do have Asian hornet, right? So whether it's flying straight from France or whether it's jumping Jersey and then to Guernsey, it's up for debate, but slightly different geography, like they've got slightly different things going on, but really key that we collaborate with them. We do collaborate with them. We have something called an inter-island environment meeting every year that includes Guernsey, Alderney, Sark, Herne, Jersey, and the Isle of Man, which is way up north in the UK, but they join in. So yes, we do collaborate closely with Guernsey, and it's really important. Another thing is fact sheets. We're picking a top, I think it's a top 15 species that we want to put out fact sheets to the public that are priority species for us, but that are easily identifiable. That's a combined effort between us and Guernsey. No point in making separate fact sheets with separate branding, different formats. We're going to put fact sheets out together, co-branded with invasive species that we're both concerned about. So yeah, we do collaborate with them, and it's a really important part of what we do. Question back here?
Yeah, so you mentioned that tourism is one of the big ways to get invasive species to get introduced to your island specifically. So I'm curious, like, what type of tourism do you have that brings people? Is it the beaches, or is it kind of like other natural landscapes or city life?
It's the cows. It's the cows. We have foot passengers from France quite often. So we have like a ferry link between Jersey, between the Channel Islands and between France. So we get a lot of foot passengers from France. Tourism is not the main thing that introduces invasive species, but it can. What happens as well, and this is kind of anecdotal, right? But we know it's happening. People bring plants back. They go for a day trip to France and they go to a garden centre, like, oh, I like this plant, I'm going to bring it with me. They plant it in their garden, it escapes. It's everywhere in Jersey. Like you can see that happening. We literally do day trips to France in the summer, like every day. So you can hop on the boat to France, you can spend the day there in St. Malo. You can go and enjoy some French cheese and French wine and bring a plant back with you, and then all of a sudden we have a problem, right? So that's one area of tourism. We have close ties with the UK. We do have boats to the UK, so again, same thing. There are species in the UK, believe it or not, that we don't want in Jersey. It's like, it's complicated a little bit. You would expect that we have quite similar species, and we do in a lot of instances, but there are definitely some that aren't native to Jersey that we don't want. Same mechanism, right? People go on holiday, they bring something back. Could be plants from a garden centre, it could be something on their shoes, it could be a mosquito in their car as they're sitting at Dover waiting for the boat or something, you know, like, it can be that simple. So we have to watch out for that, and we want to get some messaging at the harbours to encourage people not to risk it. Like we say, don't risk it. Don't bring things back from your holidays, no matter how cool they are, because they might have really significant impacts on Jersey. Its biodiversity, its culture, its agriculture, etc. Thank you. Any other questions?
Okay, thank you for coming today.